Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us on Fully Scored once again. It's great to see you.
Great to be here. Thank you, Matthew.
And it seems like a long while since we spoke to you in one of our live episodes. Luckily, this isn't quite as terrifying because we can edit it.
I love that. Thank you for that.
And this is our Christmas special of the year 2023, and we're going to be looking at a suitably festive piece of music, The Festive Season by Morley Calvert. So, my first question for you is, where did you first come across this piece, if you can remember?
Yeah, we played it in my core band, Chelmsford Citadel Band, under bandmaster Simon Schultz, and I quite enjoyed it. I like the format of a suite, and it wasn't too difficult for a festival series piece, but three carols that are pleasing to hear and fairly well known, so it would probably be more than 25 years ago that I played it.
Amazing. And I have to say, personally, it's not a piece that I'm that familiar with, so I'm looking forward to finding out a little bit more about it. But having listened to some recordings, it's a very, very finely done piece of music. Sometimes Christmas music of this genre can be a little bit twee and cheesy, but it's very, very well done, I have to say, in my opinion. So we'll find out, I'm sure, why that is in a few moments. But let's talk about the composer, first of all. Morley Calvert. What can you tell us about Morley Calvert?
Well, he's a Canadian, and his output wasn't hugely prolific for the Salvation Army, but the pieces that he did write, I think, were good ones, were winners. If I think about My All Is on the Altar, that little gem that many of us will have played, and even for our transgressions, that meditative study, which is very emotional and full of drama. Those are two great pieces. And I remember my first music school in East London Division, with Clarence Adu and Eiliv Herrickstad as the bandmasters. We played Canadian Folk Song Suite, which of course is Morley Calvert. And I just think he has a great efficiency about his writing and his scoring. He passed away in 1991. He was a soldier and bandmaster and songster leader at Montreal Citadel. We'll recognise that corps from the march. And he was there, very prolific in the 50s and 60s as a writer for the army. And published as late as 1985 with St Agnes.
And this piece is written as a Christmas carol suite. There can't be many pieces that have that subtitle to them. And it features three Christmas carols. Would you like to introduce the three carols that are in the piece?
Yeah, we have Christ Was Born on Christmas Day, which is a 17th century carol, which I can't recall singing in a congregation, but certainly familiar with from records or playing in the carol book. Then you have the Holly and the Ivy, which I have to say, I don't like that carol. And I think it comes back to, in the carol book, Christmas Praise, the trombones just have the melody. They don't have anything of interest, just a boring melody. So I've never really enjoyed that carol, but it's well treated in this piece. And then finally we have Good King Wenceslas to finish off, which I think is a great carol. For me. So a good suite of carols. The interesting thing about suites, it's kind of a dying form, really, in our journals. Ken Downey recently did a Christmas suite in Triumph series, but it's been more than 20 years, I think, in general series to have a suite. But it was something that was very popular in the 30s, 40s and 50s. I have a bandsman at my corps, Dr. Ron Holtz, who I think is a contributor to this podcast, and he was telling me the first suite was Eric Ball's Songs of the Morning back in the late 30s. And I think it's a great format because you get to introduce three different tunes, give them a small treatment, and it's very pleasing programmatically. I just think we've moved away from that because people tend to want a 5 to 6 minute splashy piece rather than a nice suite. And it makes me think of furniture, the front room, the three-piece suite of furniture. It's the same thing musically. You get three tunes, and they're usually hung together with a common thread. In this case, Christmas carols.
The Holly and the Ivy, a Christmas duo, a comedy duo that nobody needs. There we go. So, before we get on to that, we should probably start with the first movement. As you said, the tune used is Christ Was Born on Christmas Day. Quite a mystical introduction here to the music.
Well, what strikes me here is they trusted the percussion. And I think for many years we didn't in the Salvation Army. You know, it was sort of a bass drum, snare drum here. But you have a two-measure snare drum solo, which is a bit of a risk at pianissimo, which not many snare drummer players can do, actually. And then you get this beautiful muted cornet trio. which is echoed beautifully in the trombones, before we enter in what I would call a kind of pastoral feel to this carol, with a little ostinato in the tubas and euphoniums, and then the melody appearing again in trio form in the solo cornets.
And then the music changes key at letter B. What can you tell us is of interest in that next section?
Well, I do find it interesting that it changes key, because it quickly changes back. And Morley Calvert, he has an efficiency about changing key. Sometimes in a measure, he will just pivot. And I think the reason it changes key, really, other than musical interest, is it allows the horns to play the melody at an appropriate pitch. So he's moved it up a fourth here, and allows them to play in their comfortable register to take the melody, which changes the texture of the piece. Again, there's some echoing in the cornet section, and I just love the way he uses mellows and brights, and this is a fairly common compositional technique for brass bands, but he does it very efficiently, very cleverly here in this opening carol.
Let us see, the scoring's much thicker. Is there anything that you can pull out of this texture here that's of interest?
Yeah, you've got some classic lush Calvert harmonies here, and I'm a lover of harmony. You know, whenever you get those sort of jazzy chords or chromaticisms, it's a bit like Eric Lydson. You have this third treatment of the melody here, so something has to change harmonically, and he does that really well with the chromaticisms in bars 5, 6, 7 or so. But it is a much more confident approach to this carol. Christ was born on Christmas Day in the third iteration of it, but I do love his lush harmonies. And then you have the horns and the baritones kind of bring it to a screeching halt, and you get this sort of fermata, or pause, as you would say, before letter D, and then a sort of softer approach to the last verse here. And what I love about Calvert is he uses these flat sevenths. So you've got these accented chords that come in kind of shockingly, really, in such a pastoral, pleasant piano setting. And they include a nice flattened seventh, which just makes it really juicy. And then it finishes kind of how it started, with a muted cornet, this time being echoed beautifully by the euphonium. So it's a delightful, elegant opening section without getting too long. I mean, you get 3 verses, but it doesn't feel overly long. In terms of a suite, you don't want it to be too long. So I think he's done it with excellent efficiency, as Morley Calvert usually does.
Fabulous. So that takes us on to the second movement, the meat inside the sweet, if you want to think of it in that way, the holly and the ivy.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good English carol, and interestingly enough, here in terms of a suite, it's not your traditional fast, slow, fast, as we might have music played now. If you're doing 3 tunes, you would definitely have a slow second movement. This goes along at a fair clip, 116 beats per minute, and you get a nice ostinato in the euphonium with the baritone, and then this pedal on the tuba. And then the flugelhorn. Why not give the melody to the flugelhorn? It's a beautiful solo instrument, thinly scored, some interjections from other horns and a solo cornet, but just pleasantly presented very simply. And here is a technique that I think is underused in brass band writing, is unison. We tend to harmonise everything, but here we have the trombones and cornets in unison at letter E, which I always think is delightful, and then it comes through with more chromatic harmony, as Calvert likes to use here in letter E. Maybe that was of the era with those chromaticisms, but they're very pleasing to me. Then I love letter F, Matthew. I love it. If you look at the horn part, it's not the melody, it's a counter melody, but the flugelhorn and the horn section have these parallel triads, actually on the second inversion here, and they just keep moving with the melody in the bottom end of the band, the tubas, euphonium and baritone. And it's 8 measures of parallel triads, which is really clever to my mind, and adds a lot of interest in on top of the melody, and allows just the bottom end to express themselves there.
Fabulous. What happens at letter G?
Yeah, here we have the chorus, and kind of starts more confidently as it's fully scored, if you mind the pun, and at a reasonable dynamic level before going down to pianissimo with an uncertain cadence on the pause or the fermata, with the meno mosso there, and then an ar tempo. And it's interesting here, we have some chromaticisms again from Morley Calvert, and then an allegando, which strikes me as being kind of angry initially, with this minor sounds in there. And then, beautifully, the last 3 measures of this movement, we introduce some modern jazz chords. And I love how he does this. We have the 6th here. That actually, firstly, we have a major 7th chord, E flat major 7, which is beautifully scored, and then a major 6th chord to finish on. And I would say to composers, when you are adding a purple note into a chord, a 9th, a 6th, a major 7th, you don't need to heavily score it. So just 1 or 2 parts. I would say don't put too much sugar in your tea. And here we have just 2 players, the first baritone, the first horn, just adding that little bit of colour to that chord, which perhaps would be modern sounding for its time, I'm not sure. And then the last thing I'd say about this section, it finishes with a triangle tremolo. And I'm thinking, if I wrote this piece now, which I would never get close to writing a piece of this quality, but I would put a triangle note at the end. I wouldn't do the tremolo, but I kind of like it. I think it's kind of cool. So you have these jazz chords after this angry conclusion, and then a little tremolo on the triangle to let us know it's all done and dusted.
I would say don't ever put any sugar in your tea. Sacrilege.
Well, I'm a coffee drinker. I don't drink tea, but if I did, I'd have a couple of sugars in there.
Oh, dear me. Cuts me to the bone. Talking about to the bone, I'm sure a chill to the bone was felt by good King Wenceslas as he wandered through the streets of Bohemia, modern-day Prague. And it wouldn't be a Christmas piece, would it, without the use of sleigh bells? I would probably hazard a guess this is maybe one of the first pieces published in the Salvation Army with sleigh bells?
Yeah, I would think so. They appear, of course, in Christmas Joy with Leidesden, which would have been a bit later, I would think. But yeah, I wouldn't know of a piece before this that had sleigh bells. And it reminds me of kind of, Rimsky-Korsakov or Prokofiev's Troika, and you get these fifths in the tuba with this kind of ostinato. It's sort of, driving forward through the snow, if you like, through Prague, as you say. But nicely scored in this section. Euphoniums with the melody, and then the baritones, first and second in unison, harmonising. So the simplicity of sometimes just having three parts, tuba part in fifths, a melody, and then just a harmony part, maybe in thirds or sixths, to highlight that. Some interjections from other places, but generally that's what you have in a whole section. And sometimes, in scoring, less is more, and I think he's done a great job here through the start of this carol.
And at letter H, the music shifts up a notch. We change key once again. Is this one of those efficient key changes you were talking about earlier?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, he gives us about a quaver of key change, which is all he needs, and just sets it up. And I think it heightens the drama. You have accent, shock notes, suddenly down to piano with slurred notes. You have staccato descending quavers, and then you have slurred ascending quavers that are not chromatic, that are more traditional in their harmony. So he loves changing the texture, harsh and loud and staccato and chromatic. And then in the very next bar, you have smooth, quiet, more traditional harmony. So this is a section of transition for sure, but there is plenty of drama in there and plenty of Calvertisms, if I can say that, about Morley's style and his music.
Again, we have some reference to these shot notes and shot chords at letter I. What else can we see in this section leading us into J?
Yeah, this is really 4 measures of transition, and he's setting up a key change, and he's doing it over 4 measures. So he's spreading his wealth on this key change, which I just think is great. It adds to excitement. You can feel it building with the accents, and I'm sure even though it's marked forte, you have a little crescendo at the end, but I can hear a lot of bands just pushing that crescendo through all 4 measures as the excitement builds. And then you get this grandioso moment at J, where it's a little bit slower, and you've got to be careful that the bass trombone doesn't overpower everybody. And one thing that, frankly, I missed when I played this, Matthew, it was the flugelhorn and first cornet have decked the halls with boughs of holly for four bars. And I had never really heard that. I had definitely heard Joy to the World in the euphoniums, which comes just a couple of measures later, in the kind of the same way that in the end of Joy in Bethlehem, Les Condom, he starts putting all these tunes in right at the end. It's sort of a roller coaster as you're going towards the end of the piece. And then he kind of withdraws again to this Russian kind of sounding ostinato again, a little bit softer, using again those flattened sevenths, which I love. Juicy little chord there. Adds a little bit of drama. Big crescendo, big moment, pulls it all the way back, big finish. You get the statement, Good King Wenceslas last looked out from the horns at fortissimo, marcato. And then what do you get? In the last 3 bars, you get jingle all the way. How many times, how many pieces have we heard jingle all the way in the last measure or bars of a piece of music? And Morley Calvert's done it in the festival series. Maybe he was the first and everyone else followed, but it's classic and I love the way he does it. And it ends with, just a nice solid chord at the end. And I just think that this is not overextended. We're not putting the kitchen sink into this composition, but it is well put together. And I would go as far as to say not a measure wasted. Or a bar. Not a bar wasted in this piece of music. It's pretty efficient, and I think that's kind of the hallmark of Morley Calvert's music, really, that he was able to do that. And it's a lovely suite. I think it's very effective, it's fun, and I'll go back to Les Condon's program notes, or score notes, I should say. This is what he says about this piece. He says, Christmas music is often required to contain high musical quality, but an absence of intricate technicalities. And I presume he says that because there's not much rehearsal time before Christmas. So you want something that sounds good, but you haven't got a lot of time to, learn the notes, etc. And Condon says that the festive season meets both these needs. So high musical quality, but it doesn't have all the intricate technicalities that another festival series piece might have. But I think overall it's a really effective addition to the Christmas repertoire.
the festive season. The only three-piece suite you need this Christmas. Thank you, Nick, for divulging and looking at that piece of music. Really a great piece of music there. Just before we do finish and wrap up, or in the opposite of presents on Christmas Day, have you got a favourite performance or favourite recording that you've heard of the work?
Well, I mean, I enjoyed playing it with my core band. I think, I've listened to one or two recordings which are older, and sometimes older recordings have a great quality about them, and sometimes they sound a little bit rough. So I prefer to think of it when I was playing in my core band in England, and it was cold. It wasn't like Atlanta where it's hot in the winter. It was cold, and I was getting excited. I'm one of those people that loves the anticipation of Christmas. I can't wait, to enjoy the build-up. Christmas Day is fine, it's lovely, but I really enjoy the excitement of being cold and carol playing around the streets. And I think there was probably a performance of my core band where we really nailed it, and I enjoyed my part on first trombone. So I'm going to keep that one in my memory if I can.
Fantastic. Thank you very much for that indeed. Well, Nick, thank you so much for joining us once again on Fully Scored, and hopefully it's not the last time, but thank you for giving up your time.
Thanks, Matthew.